Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It is now another wonderful day at Nexus Conference, and we are going to start this one off with a bang. I got to tell you, it is pretty exciting to be here and to get a chance to tap into the brain power of the speakers that you have. I have just had the wonderful opportunity of a lifetime to get a chance to talk to one of my heroes that I watched on television many, many decades ago. Getting a chance to know the wisdom of wonderful people. And you probably have an idea who that might be if you've been watching the schedule. But what I would like to do right now is to introduce two wonderful people who are going to help you. And they're going to be coming out here, so I can come out on the stage right now. But we want to let you know we've got a wonderfully busy day ahead for you. Lots of information. Look at that schedule and notice what's happened. It is packed with great ideas, with people that are going to be marvelous speakers. And we have a film festival tonight. You want to make sure you have a plan for that. So right now, what I'd like to do is to bring out two ladies that are going to introduce our speaker for you, Christina Tobin and Anastasia Dadashpour. And they are here to tell you about our speaker today. Come on out, ladies. Round of applause, please.
Thank you.
Christina Tobin. Okay.
Thank you, Terry, so much. Hi, good morning. Thanks for all of you that made it here so bright and early, 9 a.m. Here for Mr. Asner to speak. I am Christina Tobin. I'm the founder of the Free and Equal Elections Foundation. The United States has 435 congressmen and 100 senators, but it has only one Ed Asner. Ed is still to this day the most awarded male actor in the history of television, having won 7 Primetime Emmys along with other awards. He would have had more of them, except his show was taken off the air. You may hear a bit from him as to why this happened in a few minutes. Ed has worked on the GM assembly line, served in the U.S. military, and been the president of the Screen Actors Guild. He knows a little bit about real life in the United States, like the television character that he created, the TV newsman and reporter Lou Grant. Ed always finds a way to speak his mind, even when a lot of other people would very much prefer that he not. He can be described as fiercely democratic, which means that he gets emotional about injustice, unfair advantage, hypocrisy, and arbitrary abuse of power. This has caused him to frequently exhibit a state of what might be called mighty dissatisfaction. For example, he's mightily dissatisfied with what has been going on lately here in America. He's worked with a lot of organizations, fought a lot of battles, and been the champion of causes that others might care about, but won't dare to take a risk for. He's not a reckless man, but he's also not afraid to be right, because of the price you have to pay for daring to be right. Ed is a true mensch. It's an honor and a privilege to introduce a great actor, mentor, and friend of the Free and Equal Elections Foundation, Mr. Ed Asner.
Thank you, my beauteous Christina. What happened? The plague hit? My God. Or did the government take your draft cards? Yes. I'll never make it. Well, let's get the preliminaries out of the way. I'm delighted to be here. This gorgeous dell, this Eden, and to see that you're the children of Israel. I'm here tonight, or today, let's make it, to support the idea of free and equal elections. I'm also here to support the idea of America. It's funny to be able to say that. It's pretty bloodied up. It's been dragged through the mud. And it's done a lot of dragging through the mud of others. But I'm here to support it anyway. The question is that a fool's errand? Have we gone so far down the road that no matter how many young bodies we throw on the pyre of activism, we can't ever really win? It's a deep question. Now, before you give in to the impulse to just to shout no, look at it for a minute from my point of view. I was born November 15th, 1929. I'll be 88 years old this November 15th. In other words, if you know anything about what happened to the stock market in 1929, 17 days before I was born, then you know that the moment I arrived, things weren't exactly looking up. Actually, I always had the sneaky suspicion that my father blamed my arrival for the Depression. But there was someone in the White House by the time I was 3 who insisted that we have nothing to fear but fear itself. Since that time until now, there has never been, in my view, a president that even approaches FDR. That's one. And what he did for the country. Social Security, the Civilian Conservation Corps, the Glass-Steagall Act, WPA, the Tennessee Valley Authority, saving family farms from foreclosure. I saw people move forward out of a mess. I saw poor people get help and stand on their own 2 feet and change themselves, their condition, and the country. And I saw America fight a good war. Is there such a thing? Who the hell knows? A necessary war, let's call it that, against fascism. And a war that could have been prevented. And win that war on 2 fronts and build the strongest economy in the world at the same time. And the president died with that task pretty much completed. That all happened between the time I was 3 years old and when I was 15. FDR died April 12, 1945. Now, in the more than 7 decades of my life since then, I haven't seen a president do, or America do, what it did then. Yeah, sure. There have been great moments, and even some leaders that it might have been great, the ones that weren't assassinated. But the question is, look at it this way. From 1929 to 1945 is 16 years. In my youth, America fought a war for 4 years and made the world a better place than it would have been. America has now been fighting a war on terror. Yeah, bullshit. For 16 years. Is the world a better place? In that time, our government, in its mission to spread democracy, has overthrown or tried to overthrow governments in Afghanistan in 2001, Venezuela in 2002, Iraq in 2003, Haiti in 2004, Somalia in 2007, Honduras in 2009, Libya in 2011, Syria in 2012, and Ukraine in 2014. And that's just what we know. Whether it's a Republican administration or a Democratic administration, the constant for 16 years has been nonstop war. We've been around for almost 250 years. During that time, that 250 years, we have not been at war for 21 of those years. 21 years out of 250. Doesn't that give you pause to think? Are we kind of somewhat a warlike nation? A Teutonic nation? Have we forgotten what that great Republican Dwight Eisenhower said before he left office? Beware the military-industrial complex. We sure have not been beware enough. We've been nothing but warlike. We should be called Teutons, the Merry Teutons. I was in a movie you may have seen, JFK by Oliver Stone. I played Guy Bannister, an FBI agent in New Orleans at the time of the Kennedy assassination. He was a real sweetheart of a guy. There was a speech in the movie, not by me, but by a character simply called Mr. X, who explains to District Attorney Jim Garrison why Kennedy was murdered. He tells him, the organizing principle, I quote, the organizing principle of any society, Mr. Garrison, is for war. The authority of the state over the people resides in its war powers. And Kennedy wanted to end the Cold War in his second term. He wanted to call off the moon race in favor of cooperation with the Soviets. He signed a treaty with the Soviets to ban nuclear testing. He refused to invade Cuba in 1962. And he set out to withdraw from Vietnam. But all of that ended on the 22nd of November 1963. As early as 1961, they knew Kennedy was not going to war in Southeast Asia. Like Caesar, he is surrounded by enemies, and something's underway, but it has no face. Yet everybody in the loop knows. Everything is cellularized. No one has said he must die. There's been no vote. Nothing's on paper. There's no one to blame. It's as old as the crucifixion. A military firing squad, 5 bullets, 1 blank. No one's guilty because everyone in the power structure who knows anything has a plausible deniability. End quote. I recently came across a good book. I don't know when it came out, but it's quite a fascinating book. It's called JFK and the Unspeakable. JFK and the Unspeakable. And there's a chapter in that book in which the author, and I can't remember his name, I'm sorry, in which the author says that the FBI, the Secret Service, the CIA were all directly involved in the assassination of JFK. I won't go beyond that. If you want to learn more, get the book. Here's what I said 4 years ago when it looked like the United States was about to illegally bomb Syria, and I was mad as hell. I was interviewed by the Hollywood Reporter. I said, we had 1 million people in the streets, for Christ's sake, protesting Iraq, which is about as illegal a war as you could find. Did it matter? Is George Bush being tried in the high courts of justice? We've been so goddamn stung in this country by false wars repeatedly that how can you believe in any just war with the history we have had? So you see why I posed the question to you, is it worth it? You know, Martin Luther King once pointed out that in this unfolding conundrum of life and history, there is such a thing as being too late. There is no time for apathy or complacency. But here's my problem. I have watched decades of injustice play out and go by, and I've watched as the mighty Wurlitzer organ played on. That's a theme used by a CIA agent to describe how the American people would get played over and over to support what was often against their best interests. Let me tell you a story about something that happened to me. Little old me. This is 35 years ago when I was the lead actor in a television series called Lou Grant. It was a serious hour-long show that had spun off of the half-hour comedy, The Mary Tyler Moore Show, which was also important in 1970s America for different reasons. Well, I was also president of the Screen Actors Guild, and I was very active in the early 1980s. I worked with Medical Aid for El Salvador and other groups. They were opposing a horrible war in El Salvador, not really a war, depredation by the military on the peasants, kind of like Vietnam. They were opposing a horrible war in El Salvador where we were, as usual, doing the wrong thing. Matter of fact, this one isn't even on the official coup list. I went to a press conference on behalf of Medical Aid for El Salvador in early 1982, very packed press conference. I was asked to read the credo of the group, which I did. I then took questions from the press. The second question that day was, Mr. Asner, you say that you are for free elections in El Salvador. But what if after an election it brought a communist government into power? Wow. I fumbled the question. Then there was another question. I fumbled that question's answer too. Let me tell you what was going on. Many of you have only heard of the Hollywood blacklist of the 1950s. Lots of people, fine actors, because of their political beliefs or because they wouldn't inform on their friends, had their careers ruined and never worked again. There's another side to this. During the Second World War, we were allied with Russia. That alliance won that war against fascism. But after the war, there were people in government agencies that used their power to create a police state atmosphere against millions of Americans. It was called red baiting. If you didn't like what someone was saying, call them a communist, a socialist, a red. This was all about reversing what Franklin Roosevelt had given to the American people, solidarity in the face of adversity. There was nothing to fear but fear itself. In that same famous speech from 1933, when I was 3 years old, FDR had used the phrase, nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror. And that's what you had in the late 1940s and the 1950s. Intimidation, enforced conformity, an end of the sense of solidarity. For example, people were required to take loyalty oaths to work at any government job, especially in the defense sector. And it had nothing to do with whether you had any suspicious political affiliation or not. In 6 years, from 1947 until 1953, the FBI processed 4,666,122 sets of fingerprints and over 4.5 million loyalty oaths. 99.4% of those oaths came back marked, no disloyal data. You could pay a very high price. FDR himself had been accused of being a socialist, even a communist, for the economic victories he won for the poor. If he could be called a communist, what chance would a regular citizen have? And I was hearing an echo of something like that 25 years later as an implied threat from those reporters. I realized that I had avoided questions. I went back to the second interrogator. I said, because I had so fumbled my first answer to him, and I said, if the government and people of El Salvador choose that way, then let them have it. I envisioned that moment, at that moment that my career was over. And, in fact, my career was ruined for a time after that. The Lou Grant Show, despite high ratings, was canceled. And that was a real crime. That show was presenting real American problems, doing something no one else on TV was doing. I was very sorry for the effect it had on the rest of the cast and the crew working on the show. I survived through enough good people that were still willing to offer me an occasional job. And the fact that I responded to every attack that was made on me changed the playing field for other actors who came afterwards. But that still doesn't really answer the question, is it worth it? At the end of the day, we haven't stopped wars, despite many protests. Sometimes in the millions we've protested. We have a secret, parallel government structure that seems to defy the will of the American people at every turn. The corporate elite of the nation believe themselves to be more powerful than the government, when they don't simply believe they themselves are the government. So why isn't this all finally futile? Why isn't the idea of free and equal elections just a dream, a nice thought, but a never reachable ideal? Let me point something out. I'm not a two-party man. The two-party system has already buried itself, and it should never have existed. No, call it a phase we had to go through. From the inception of this nation, in his farewell address, George Washington, the first president, warned of the danger of political factions driving the national government for their own ends and obfuscating the national interest. The Constitution's preamble talks about a more perfect union. And one essential part of making this union more perfect is making sure we take this rare opportunity to do away with the now waning power of the two-party system. The national political bureaucracy, including the national media, let's not forget those bozos, have yet to face the facts. The only presidential candidate that could have defeated the independent that ran as a Republican and won was an independent that ran as a Democrat. When was the last time that happened in American presidential politics? The two-party system, as we have known it from 1868 until 2008, has been eroding. 7 years back, Jesse Ventura showed that Dr. Ron Paul has shown that. And like it or not, Donald Trump shows that it has been disappearing over the past 9 or 10 years. It's like the dominance of television from the 50s through the 80s by CBS, ABC, and NBC. One day, it's gone. It isn't there. You thought that was the way things would be forever, but it suddenly disappears. My goodness, where did they go? This means that we may now have an opportunity for the greatest domestic political change in America. Not in a decade, not in a generation, but in a century and a half. Another thing, suppose we look at this from the local and state level. Our Constitution provides for elective government through these state pathways, not through parties. What if social media can supersede the old structures and create linkages among people that espouse the same principles? What if social coalitions to narrow the gap between rich and poor can come together for one election cycle and force through reforms that are otherwise doomed by party bureaucrats and procedures? Well, we know the problem of money in politics. But what if we had to find ways to campaign that allowed energetic coalitions of young people and others to elect people in states and counties where, as in this past election, nobody sees it coming? I'm not saying that this solves everything or even anything. I will say that it gives us a reason not to despair that nothing at all can be done. I'm going to close now by saying a few things that may seem crazy. That's not unusual. But I'm going to hope that they are true, even though the last 7 decades would seem to say to me they are very unlikely indeed. Evolution does not have to be slow, and revolution does not have to be quick. It was possible for us to go to the moon in a decade, and it's possible for us to establish free and equal elections in America in a decade. We have the means and the opportunity to do it. Do we have the motivation to do it? I used to stare in disbelief watching the election processes in Latin America. And there were always two parties there. There were the liberals and the conservatives. And they would take turns operating and running the country. And you'd wait and see. And being a liberal, I used to watch with fascination because the conservatives would be in power, and then finally the liberals would defeat them. What would happen? They'd perform the same outrages that the conservatives did. It was just two different parties performing the same hideousness. And that's something we have to watch here. Some actors have to ask themselves in preparing to do a role, what's my motivation? It's become a kind of joke. Because, of course, if you don't understand the play, you can't understand your character. So what's the script that we are supposed to be interpreting here? Everybody is talking these days about Alexander Hamilton, but not many people know about his close friend who gave the eulogy at his funeral. His name was Gouverneur Morris. There's another reason you should know who he is, because he wrote the preamble to the Constitution of the United States. We should all know how to recite it. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Wow. That's a hell of a title. That's a hell of a title. It's a hell of a purpose. Morris is one of the founders you can be reasonably proud of. In 1777, at the age of 25, he wrote a constitution for the state of New York that abolished slavery. He lost. In 1787, at the Constitutional Convention, he challenged the shameful 3/5 clause, which counted 5 black slaves as equal to 3 whites in order to apportion Southern congressional representation. Morris instead proposed that the nation as a whole purchase all the slaves from the South and set them free immediately. He lost. So when he used the phrase to build a more perfect union, he knew where he spoke. The government was imperfect and even immoral in many respects, but it had to be changed by those that refused to accept injustice, though injustice continued to rule. The fact that injustice is the rule in society does not mean that justice cannot exist. No way. It means that the just have to practice justice, whatever the unjust do. Take the slap in the face and go on. The same is true of elections and political power. The fact that the citizens of our nation feel powerless to stop the corruption that they perceive through government does not mean that self-government, true citizenship, and meaningful civic action cannot exist. It means that self-government has to be practiced on the local and individual level. The fact that a candidate does not appear to be available to be elected, whom you judge to represent the best interests of the people, doesn't mean that a candidate can't exist. It means that you are or may be elected to be that candidate. You don't do this on behalf of party. You do this on behalf of principle. So my script is the Constitution. My role is as a citizen, and my motivation is a more perfect union. I may not get the freedom of national self-government that I desire, but I will not abdicate the principle of personal self-government and make a butchery of my conscience for anybody. I can remain sovereign in the republic of myself. And if I demand that this be the standard to which all citizens aspire, and I find others that agree with that, then in that way, we are all equal. We are all free. We are all self-governing. And we will all move toward that more perfect union that the mighty Wurlitzer deludes us that we can never have. This is the true power of the powerless. To question authority to examine with a very fine lens our media. It may be all mad, but if so, it's a fine madness to have. Thank you. Why not? Oh, yeah? Yeah, of course, nobody raised their hand. Thank you, you all lovely audience. I hope you breed.
Can I ask a question? What do you see in the differences between TV of the 70s and TV today? How do you see
There's
those
more
comparisons?
chaos running. I mean, you have a multiplicity of choices. So it's harder to control. And, of course, the Kardashian-type news will be what will dominate. So we can get beyond that.
Can we?
I think when there were just three, the fact that Huntley Brinkley or Walter Cronkite was there, you believed. And generally, they were right. So until some popos like those come along, the multiplicity of broadcast doesn't mean a goddamn thing. It's the fact that at least the villains can't control you, because none of them have the power or the majesty of Cronkite and Huntley Brinkley. But we keep looking for the prophets.
Yeah. One of the key things
That's
we talk about here,
PRO.
that's right. That's right. One of the key things we talk about here is decentralization.
Yeah.
And of course, back then it was much more centralized. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
I was those three networks. That was pretty much it. And if you wanted to control something, it would be easy to do that. How do you see advantages and disadvantages of a highly decentralized system that we have today?
Well, it's up to the people to make the worthwhile numero uno that we need so desperately to govern us and to inform us. Well, you had Jon Stewart, who certainly was acquiring a good following there. Now he's cut out. Now you have, what's his name? Who was the guy?
Stephen Colbert.
Stephen Colbert. But there's a little too much flaky going on there.
Well, we see that in Washington a lot anyway. All right. Any other questions? All right.
Come on, don't leave this man alone.
Sorry. Ed Asner, thank you, sir.